This is Russell Korets. I'm a pastor here in the Northwest. And today I get to introduce you to some of my friends, church planters from around the nation. I'm connected to a bunch of guys who have planted community churches around the U.S., but these guys have an ethnic background. And wanted to introduce you to some of them today. Pastor Peter from Orlando, Florida, who leads a great church called Elevation Orlando. You might have heard of this church and this little worship band called Elevation. So Pastor Peter is a part of that team and leads an incredible campus of that. I have a close friend named Eugene from the great Northwest with us, about 40 minutes from where we are in Kirkland, Washington. Leads an incredible church, Mercy Church, that is just doing some great things in Kent, Washington. Kent, Washington, believe it or not, is a city of about 100,000 people, but is in the top 10 nationally for most diverse cities in America. The world has come to Kent, Washington, and Eugene leads an incredible church in Kent. And then Pastor Paul from Boise, Idaho. Man, this guy is killing it. He leads several campuses, part of an incredible church in Boise, Idaho. I can't wait for you guys to hear their stories. But before I let him speak, wanted to just take a minute to invite you to something. Many of us are connected to this organization called Church Momentum Collaborative. Really is it's an organization that is connected to ethnic pastors who are planting community churches around the U.S. or ethnic churches that start an English service. And from time to time, we come together and we just share our experiences. And October 3rd and 4th are actually coming together here in the Seattle, Washington area, in Kirkland, Washington. There's probably going to be several hundred leaders here. We're going to be sharing our experiences of planting community churches or starting English services. And this year we'll have an incredible guest with us, Larry Osborne, who took a church from like 150 people to 13,000 in Southern California. Written a number of books called like Sticky Teens and Sticky Church and many others. He'll be with us. There'll be a bunch of other pastors as well, sharing and speaking. So if you are a church planter, want to plant, or maybe you're part of an ethnic church and are thinking about starting an English service, this is a great gathering for you. Some of these guys are going to be there as well. But I want you to hear their stories. And so let's start with Eugene, since he's closest to us here. Eugene, tell us a little bit about your story and your church planting story. Where are you from?
Yeah, well, I'm 33 years old. I moved to Ukraine with my parents in 1999, when I was 9 years old. I grew up in a pastor's home and in a small Ukrainian church almost all of my life, meeting at 1 or 2 p.m. in the afternoon, renting. And, around age 20, I was really battling with what my calling was. And then I was originally going to be a high school teacher because I love teaching. That's like my favorite passion of mine, but I was also super involved in church. And I just had that dark night of the soul, as they say, where you're wrestling, struggling, doubting, not sure what to do. And I originally came to two decisions. I'm either going to go all in into business. I'm going to go all in into the church. I'm going to live for the glory of God. One is a little more direct. And I just knew I had to plant a church and I had to lead and I had to reach our community. So in 2021, in September, we launched with 60 core members in a high school called Kent Ridge High School, with 60 core members. And we got going. We were mostly Ukrainian. The core was one type of ethnicity only. And we got going, and slowly but surely, we've been growing and growing and growing. We're almost 3 years old today. And we just got a new building, which
Come on.
it's a 10,000 plus square foot facility that I can show you guys after. And we're just so excited. One of the core things about us is we love our community. that we do everything for him, that we do outreach. We just had last Sunday back to school bash. We had over 350 people that came,
Wow.
uh, and we had all sorts of things. Gave out uh, 75 backpacks and 150 to a local elementary school. So hey, this is my passion. I love being a church planner. I love Mercy. I love our city, and so I can't wait to see what's in the future.
Oh, man, Eugene is one of the most humble guys you will ever meet. Just his heart. As a pastor, I mean, that's the kind of pastor I want to have.
No, please. Thank you. Thank you,
Yeah,
Ross. Thank
yeah.
you.
Thanks for sharing. We've got some questions, man. I want to learn what God is doing. But let's go to Peter from Orlando, Florida, the promised land.
And listen, the Sunshine State is the promised land. It is good to be in Florida. I will say it's good to be. It's not just Disney World here. Got other things like palm trees and some sun and a lot of humidity. So if you like saunas, it's
Yes.
outside all the time for you. You know what I mean? Afternoon showers is great. Man, this is awesome, Russell. Thank you for putting this together and just kind of hearing different stories and things like that. And and similar to your story, Eugene, I was born in Ukraine, moved here with my parents in the early '90s. I think '94 is when we moved, and I'm 33 and grew up in Ukrainian church my whole life. We actually moved to the Seattle area first. And to me, my parents and I saw my parents, both mom and dad, in the choir, and God was such an important value in our home, and it wasn't just read your Bible and go to church on a Sunday. I actively saw my parents pursuing Jesus, and of course, like Eugene, you mentioned, like you can grow up in it and you can kind of believe in God. Not kind of, you believe like He's there, but you're kind of just you're wrestling through what life's going to be, anyways, for you. It's
Yes.
not your relationship that you rely on your parents to fill with Jesus, but it's yours. It's got to be personal to you. And so for me, it didn't happen until I left for college. So when graduated high school, I was like, freedom! I have to go to church every Sunday because I went every Sunday. I mean, I missed probably on one hand church. All right. And I was sick. No, you're coming to church, and you're gonna get healed there when you show up. And so that was like the faith I grew up around. And so whenever I went to college, it was kind of like freedom. I get to do whatever I want, and I don't have to go to church. And I was actually got a scholarship to play soccer. And so I was like, I want to play soccer. It's gonna be the dream. And on the outside, people would have been like, you're living the dream. But deep down, something about me, there's just this deep conviction. My mom's prayers, my grandmother's prayers. I think the legacy of faith, the heritage where we're from. Many Slavics kind of relate to that if you grew up in a Christian household, a Christian Slavic household. And so I think it was just deep inside me, like Jeremiah, was shut up in my bones that at some point I needed to make a decision to follow Jesus. And I did. At the end of that year, my first year of college, something in me was like, no, you got to go all in with Jesus. And I did. And looking back, I didn't know it was going to be ministry. I didn't know it was going to be, I was doing political science and pre-law. I thought I was going to do like attorney work or something, post if I didn't go professional soccer. And so right around the end of my first, went to my undergrad, and I was serving in a local church. I was actually at a Ukrainian speaking church at that time, and I started a English speaking youth service on a Thursday. And the whole goal of it was to reach people within our community I can invite my friends to. And so that kind of stirred up this passion to want to preach the gospel, reach people, meet them where they are. But I didn't want to be in like a church ministry staff thing. I was just like, I'm just going to do it, And when I graduated college at that time, something was like, you know what? I'm going to have like a gap year or something. And I want to go to Bible college just to equip myself to continue to do, ministry at the local church level, and went to Bible college. And when I got back, it was kind of one of those things where something in me was like, you know what? I think God, you're calling me to full-time ministry. And I was trying to wrestle it. I was trying to like run from it. And I lived at that time in North Carolina, and Elevation Church was kind of in that area. I ended up marrying someone in Bible college who's Canadian. And so for me, it was kind of like, she doesn't speak Ukrainian or Russian. And don't matter how hard I try to teach her, she probably won't know. So we need a local church that she and I can go to. And so Elevation Church became that church for us. And somehow, some way, I got on staff at that church. And I told God, listen, I'm not building a door. You either got to push me through, force me through. And honestly, kind of did that. I ended up getting let go of a job, laid off because they overstaffed it. And it was my clear answer. You got to go into ministry. And from that point on, somehow, some way, I ended up becoming a pastor in our church. And they called me in 2020 to launch a church in Orlando, Florida, and to be our 20th location of our church. And I did not want to be the pastor. I said, hey, I got 5 people that can do it. I'll go help. And they said, no, it's you. And so we prayed about it and felt like, you know what, if it's going to require a lot of faith and trust in God, then my wife and I, Jess, we probably should say yes. And we did. And so we launched in 2020, 7 weeks before the pandemic. And that day, 21 people gave their life to Jesus.
Come on.
And we have seen over 2,500 people make a decision to follow Jesus in 4 years. And so it's been nothing short of God's glory and favor and blessing. And it's got the lows and it's got the highs. I'm not going to lie. And there's some days you're like, man, don't want to show up. But it's rewarding in every bit. And so I'm grateful to see how God's been moving. And he's going to continue to move. And he reminded me through COVID years when I was like, man, this was a mistake. 7 weeks in, we shouldn't have done this. And it was like, no, like I build a church. I care about the church more than you, Peter. So you keep trusting me, keep showing up, and I'm going to build the church. You keep sowing and watering. And so as a church is what we keep doing. We keep sowing and watering, but God's going to keep bringing the harvest.
Wow.
So
Man,
good.
this is inspiring. You know what, I was reading about Orlando, Florida. We took a trip with my wife to Italy finally. But then I was reading about Orlando, and turns out Orlando, Florida has more annual visitors than all of Italy. Just blown away. Orlando, Florida. It's an incredible city, and for you to be doing the work that you guys are, that's so awesome. Awesome. Thanks for sharing, Peter. Paul, want to hear a little bit of your story, and then we'll get to some questions. Tell us what God is doing in Boise, Idaho.
Yeah, guys, very inspiring to listen to both of the pastors as well, Eugene and Peter. I'm also 33, so I don't know, Russell, what you're up to. You got us all 33-year-olds on here today. But I like to say it's the perfect age, is the age of Jesus. Jesus went to heaven, but we're just beginning, so it's all right. We will get to heaven. He'll look probably about 33 as well, I'm sure. So we're good. Yeah, my name is Pastor Paul. I live in Boise, just outside of Boise, Caldwell. Very similar backgrounds to these guys here, except I was born first in my family in the United States. So I have Amerikanец. So it has its benefits, I guess. Similar thing. Grew up in a good Christian home. Slavic Pentecostal home, church every Sunday, couple times a Sunday. Godly parents were not in ministry in any way. Always took us to church, good example. And so you grow up around that. Develop different things inside of you. And early on, I think I had some kind of, probably my teenage years, desire to serve God. I started getting involved in youth ministry, was a youth leader for many years, probably for about a decade, was in different youth leadership positions in a Slavic church, having a heart for outreaching, having prison ministries going and other outreaches going in the community, but seeing that those people would not be translated into a local church, into my local church, just because of the barrier there. So coming to realize that there was a desire that God was putting in me from that time for some kind of English service, some kind of outreach thing. And I love my people. I love my church. I wanted to do something there. That was my heart. And I remember coming to a realization through a lot of different circumstances that the vision God was giving me, the house I was in was not able to sustain it. And where God was going to fulfill the vision was going to be in a different place. He was going to replant my wife and I at that time then to another house that would be able to have the nutrients necessary to raise that vision up. I too had a phase where I was thinking, God, send somebody else. I could think of 5 people that I can go and be their number one support, be their best help. And there come a moment where, 3-4 years later, you're still carrying that burden of church. And I said, finally, okay, God, if you're calling me to start a church, I don't want to start in a basement. I don't want to start in a garage. I know that's a lot of people's testimonies. Lord, I want to have a sound equipment. I want to have a team. I want to have kids ministry. I want to have a building, and I want a new truck as well. And so I put all that on my shopping list. And I kid you not, I looked about a year back after we started. God fulfilled everything that I put on the list. We had teams, we had people, we had a building. I blessed me with a truck, and everything was there. And, it was just the favor of God. And so what we did is, as we transitioned out of the Slavic community, I thought God was going to send us out and bring us back with training and whatever, but God had other plans in mind. The church I'm a part of right now, Christian Faith Center, we came on with my wife as door greeters, stepped down from leadership roles in the previous church, and came in just to support. They were planting their fourth location at the time, and so we were supporting that. So we got to be a part of the grunt crew, coming in, setting up, tearing down, being there. And about 6 months after that, I was already licensed with the Assemblies of God, actually. My pastor approached me and said, "Hey, can you jump on staff and be one of our associate pastors?" And so I got involved in that way. And then about a year and a half later, it was already stirring in our hearts. We started seeing the need more and more. We started seeing for a Slavic extension. And so what we did first is, that's the first one that we started with my wife and I, is we started going that direction to start a Slavic Christian Faith Center Slavic extension. And so long story short, we launched that in about almost 3 years ago now. When it's actually over 3 years, 3.5 years since we started that. A year after we began, we had another location pastor that stepped down to move out of state, and I was asked to take over another location, another part of the city. So we prayed about it, understood it was the Lord's leading in that, and so the last 2.5 years we've been here. So now I oversee both sort of our ministries, the English side and the Slavic side. Here we do 3 services on a Sunday. We have a couple different teams. We have people that are more catered to Slavic folks. So a service with like translation, and then we have a couple English services that we do as well. So that's sort of my story. I been sort of a little bit a part of everything, a startup, started our own thing, and now leading a location and doing all that. And so that's sort of our story. But I'm so encouraged to hear, even from you guys, Peter and Eugene, same thing, loving the culture you grow up in, honoring the culture, growing up in that church, and then God somehow pulls you out and uses you amongst the local people. Because what I saw is that to truly honor our heritage and our faith, we must continue forward. We can't get stuck just to one demographic. If we're going to fulfill the mandate, we have to carry that forward. And if we have that ability, a couple different languages, resources, by all means, I think it's such an amazing thing to do.
I appreciate what you shared about, when the Lord begins to speak to you a vision. What happens when every pastor has a vision for their church, and when all of a sudden you get a separate vision, well, what's 2 visions? It's division, right? And so the honoring thing to do is not to bring division to our church. It's just to be honest, like, hey, the Lord has given you a mandate, a call for this house. The Lord is leading me to a different vision, and I think church planting is an honorable approach then. So question for you guys, kind of church planners, what has been the hardest part in planting a church for you guys? And either one of you can kind of speak into that.
I would say probably the hardest part was to say yes and understand that me stepping out, I would be leaving everything I know up to this point, my safety net, my community, everyone I grew up around, and to say, Lord, I'm willing to follow you. I'm willing to do whatever it takes to go. I think once you say yes, really what we've experienced is God started, once you say yes, take one step forward, God started opening the next doors following. And it's stepping into the life of faith. Initially, for my wife and I, that was probably the hardest decision, was to say, yes, Lord, we hear you and we're going to follow you. It doesn't make sense, but we're just jumping out and following you.
What's crazy is that not only are you guys all 33 years old, you all started kind of around COVID, start of COVID time. Saying yes in such a time is, I mean, you just have, your mind has to be gone and it has to be the Lord. So yeah, Paul, thanks for speaking into that. Anybody else want to speak into maybe some of the hardest parts of church planting?
Well, for me, I think one of the hardest things is sort of building an identity as a church. We were far smaller, right, with 60 plus people, and we're in a high school, and you meet for church service like on Sunday, and then you go home, and everybody goes home, and that's a high school, and for I don't know, for me, it was hard to become like a mercy church or a church or a family. There's a few things that I think I would do differently, and we'll save that for a little bit later. But I think that was really, really hard. It's just making everybody belong and becoming a real tight knit family. That was a challenge, I think. Also, just sustaining the pace of meeting every Sunday, setting up every Sunday, set up, tear down. That required a lot of wisdom. God gave us a lot of wisdom, a lot of mistakes. We learned a lot of things from our early weeks, but just sustaining the pace and just working on that. Because what you really want is you want people to have joy and not grow bitter and be excited and have passion for what they're doing. That's when the whole church really is blessed. That's when kids ministry is blessed. So I would say those two things were a real challenge for us.
Mm. I think it's important to note, because when you're planting, most people are coming in, their roots aren't that deep,
Yep.
right? And so they're just getting themselves plugged in. They can, and so yeah, it takes some time really to establish identity. Um, Peter, anything else you want to speak into that?
I mean, I think Paul kind of. I mean, both of those I've for sure thought about. Whether it's hard to leave what you know and your comfort to step out into the, I guess you would say, cliche statement of the unknown. Um, for me, I grew up in a Ukrainian. I mean, listen, when I moved here when I was a little kid. Call me an American too, Paul. You know what I mean? Like, I was born in Ukraine. You can't be a president, you can, but if you want to run, you can in 2028.
No, thank you.
But I think, to me, I grew up that way. Now, I think all of us will relate to the fact that we grew up Ukrainian first. And you kind of immersed in two different, if not more, cultures. I say that to say, when there was a time that felt like my wife Jess and I were called, really the big reason there was this shift for me. Yes, she couldn't speak the language, but a part of me, before I even met her, I knew that there was this passion for me to reach everyone. The Bible says to go to the ends of the earth. And I was like, I don't know if this is the ends of the earth. I'm not saying everyone's called to go to the ends of the earth. I'm not going to all parts of the world, but I felt like in the community, am I going to the ends of my community? And I don't know if I am. And I had a burden for that. And so the difficult thing to step out, and I'll translate that to launching something as well, is you've got to change your people. And so when we shifted from that Ukrainian church, I grew up from that Ukrainian culture, church, the people, my friends, the people I grew up and did life with, that took this big, massive step for me that I was just like, can I do that? Well, even from being on staff at Elevation Church to launching a campus, you have to move cities. And you've got friends, you've got a community, you've got the people, you've got your teams, you're a part of a church community. To step out into something new, you've got so much fear around it. Who are going to be my friends? And for me, I just love doing life with people. And so the idea of having to do life with new people again was like, man, I've invested so much here. I'm doing good ministry here. So there's a part of comfort that we all are unfortunately in. We pursue comfort until we're trapped by comfort. So we want comfort. We want to get to a place where we're like, man, we've got 1,000 people in church and this and that. And then you get to it, you can get trapped by it because you stop pursuing again. And I think our faith it's not how God's designed it. And you see the disciples, you would think in 3 years, their life would be very comfortable. But you read the story of the disciples, their story is far from comfortable. And I think the reality is, as a believer, it's not like that. So getting out of your comfort was difficult for me. And so, Paul, like you said, it to take that first step. But then the other side of it, like you said, Eugene, um, is the identity portion. Who are you becoming? And
Mm.
for me, in my context is I was launching a church that was a part of a church already. It was a location. So you were trying to launch the heart of your church in a completely different city. So every church and campus that we have at Elevation Church has its own identity in some ways, like in terms of taste or flavor.
Mhm.
It makes up the tapestry of the church. And it's part of one church, one house, but it's a different room. And that different room, I have a different design. It's got a different type of people group you're reaching. And it's made up of a different city, and it's got different tensions. And so just understanding and learning your city, you cannot fast track it. You can't read a book. I mean, you can do all the research and read it, but you just cannot fast track time and the process. And so I think for me, it was like, that's another tension of just like becoming the city. And I don't care how much books I read. I wasn't going to be Orlando until I lived in Orlando long enough to be like, I think I know a little bit of the city now. And I think I know what people are hurting with. And I think I know the tensions of the city and the history of the city. And so I've lived in both, Paul and Eugene. I feel like, I mean, there's so much more, but I think the first one initially for me is comfort.
Mm.
And this, the next question, probably similar to some of what you guys have shared, but how do you think your ethnic background helped or hurt your planting experience? And as you guys think about that, one of the things I've noticed that, I mean, church planting is hard. I mean, if it was easy, everybody would be doing it. It is difficult. And normally when somebody's planting a church, I mean, you're going to have people around celebrating, investing, praying. But sometimes when you're doing that out of an ethnic community, they feel like you're abandoning them. And so instead of affirming you, you're almost never going to be affirmed by some of the people because they feel like you've abandoned their culture. And that's hard, planting from kind of an ethnic background. Honestly, I'll tell you this, there's still some people that blessed me growing up, people I looked up to. And I feel like I'm doing what they taught me to do. I'm preaching the gospel in my city, which they emphasized. Yet I would so long to hear from them, and you're doing a good job. And I don't think I ever will. So what about you guys? What do you think some of the challenges or maybe some of the things that are helpful having an ethnic background?
I want to say something, Pastor Russell. You just mentioned some. I recently had I think it was earlier this year, late last year. I've been out of the Slavic community for like 6 years, but I didn't move away. I stayed locally. And I'm just speaking to other leaders that are going to watch this. That's possible. You don't have to move away. You can honorably leave it with honor in your heart, honor towards the community, and stay locally, and God can use that. And that's what happened to us. We stayed in the city where we pretty much were raised in and grew up in. I had an old lady come up to me. I was at a social event, a Slavic social event. She said, "Ну, когда ты уже вернешься?" Типа, знаешь, like people somehow in the back of their mind still thinking you're gonna come back. You're like, whoa, it actually caught me by surprise. I'm like, well, I'm actually not. But you can come visit me. So it's I think some of the difficulties having ethnic background is barriers that you have to pass for yourself, whether that's background, people, what they thought it should look like, not what God is leading you to do. But the benefits, and then I think stuff that you're wired with, automatically being a hybrid generation, an immigrant family. But that can also be your weakness is also your strength, I think, in this case, because that can be a strength because you see outside the box. You can see ministry a little differently. You understand different cultures. You understand when people come from not a white American Caucasian culture into the church. You understand why they act the way they act, why they do what they do. And I think we have a lot of pluses in our culture that I use for my benefit. Hospitality, other things. I know our Slavic guys, if I need something done, listen, I love my whole church. But if I know something needs to get done and the ball's not going to be dropped, I pull on a Slavic guy because I know he's going to whip out his table saw. He's going to do whatever he needs to do. It's going to get done. Like there is no like waiting around. Like wham, bam, boom, it's done. So I think it's a both and and. It's definitely something there's always something you can embrace from it.
Yeah, I think so. I think you cannot remove your story and who you are. I mean, you think about Moses. Um, Moses couldn't take out who he as much as he grew up as an Egyptian. He was an Israel, and his identity was marked by what God designed him to be and the people he was going to minister to. Now, I think the context of the story is flipped, obviously, for our story and our purpose. And the question is, I think there's so much impact and so much wisdom that I feel like I've garnered from my parents. You cannot take the two suitcases, move to a new country, don't know the English language, but somehow make a way for your family and serve God in the process. And also the heritage of persecution, and some of that is just, it's instilled in you, it's passed down in you, spiritually speaking too. So I think your legacy and the shoulders you stand on are actually on people who've tested the faith. So if my great grandfather, who spent 6 years in prison preaching the gospel, it's inside me. It's the heritage that
So good.
I'm speaking from a place that's not even my story, but it is my family's legacy. And so I think there's something that I'm like, I sometimes have a moment in myself where I'm like, where's this even coming from? Where's this passion coming from? Desire coming? It's so instilled in you. I can't spiritually necessarily give you all the attributes of it. I just know it's there because I grew up around it. And so my parents passed down a faith to me. Not just my parents, the culture passed down this weather-tested faith that has grit, that has adaptability, that says, you know what? I'm not going to say, oh, is church an option or a hobby? No, it's a decision. Faith isn't a feeling, it's a decision. And I think that's something that I grew up around. Now, the other tensions of it is, of course, that like whether it's cultural things or it's the, hey, are you going to come back? Or sometimes part of me initially that was difficult to take a step outside of it is we do community well. And sometimes it's almost to a detriment. Like we do community so well, we won't let anyone else in. It's like, hey, you don't speak Ukrainian or Russian. I'm sorry, it's not for you. We ain't gonna do an English service here, And if we are, it's not gonna be really great. So you probably won't stay, So I think there's that side of it as well. That those are the tensions. And when you grow up around that, it's constantly pulling on you. When are you gonna come back? Hey, you kind of abandoned us, and you have to deal with that internally, emotionally, mentally, and say like, man, did I let him down? Am I abandoning my people in some ways? And it's like, no, I'm called to build God's church. I'm doing it together. And oftentimes that would be my talking point. It's like, Russell, you said it. You taught me to do this. You taught me to preach the gospel and go reach it. Like, I'm only doing what you called me to do. And I'm not living in Ukraine anymore. So therefore, I'm really trying to embrace the community I live in. My kids are going to live here. I'm not going back. And I love my people. Someone asked me before, like, hey, if you were going to play soccer would it be for the Ukrainian national team of the U.S. one? I said Ukrainian, because it is in you. It's not that I don't want to. It's just that God's called me to be here. And I'm here, and I want to reach as many people as possible. So.
Yeah.
That's so good. So good.
One thing I'll say, Russell, you said that Kent was supposedly a diverse city. Agreed. But we're in Renton now, so it's 8 minutes away. But one thing that I did find helpful being a Ukrainian is in a city of nations, that's a barrier that's just not there anymore. You can talk to immigrants. They're coming into your church, and they love learning that you're an immigrant. They love knowing that you're just like them. So I have found that to be a huge advantage. We have a Taiwanese couple in our church, and she's actually afraid to speak because her English isn't perfect. And she actually thought we were American, which was a compliment. But once they found out that we were immigrants, everything fell down, and they became far more part of the church. They felt welcomed. So I think that's a huge advantage.
I agree. I would echo that too, 100%. I think that's one thing that's where I guess add to what I said is like, to relate to your story, that it's not this like rosy, it was easy life for you.
Yeah.
I could just say like, actually life wasn't easy. And growing up in the tensions of like trying to translate for your parents while you also don't know English well or Ukrainian well. You're just caught between the middle. You have that ability to say like, I get it a little bit. And so I do think that does play a factor in reaching people.
You know what's cool is back in the 90s, me and Peter, we actually lived in the same hood.
What?
There's actually a Facebook group. It's called "I Survived Springwood in the
Yes.
90s."
Is that in
'Cause it
Kent?
was a
That's in
hood.
Kent? That's in
And,
Kent?
yeah, that's where I grew up. I think they were a few houses down. I told Russell, I said, I don't know if you know this, but I remember he had a cool bike. And I remember him. It's like it's ingrained in my head. Like he was telling me about his cool bike, and it was like, man, that's a cool bike. I must have been like 4 or 5 at that time. I wasn't that old.
Yeah, God has a sense of humor.
Yeah.
Brothers, if you were to plan again, what would you do the same or maybe different if somebody's listening and if they want to kind of get some steps ahead? What would you do? Some things the same or some things different?
So for me, one of the things that worked in our advantage was, and this is probably a unique case, but if you're starting with primarily one ethnic group, that's your core. So for us, it was mostly Ukrainians. I think it helps to get the size right. You want to be big enough where you can do services, everything's staffed, volunteers are there, but you want to be small enough so that those from the community can come in and then they can find themselves in meaningful positions and roles to contribute. And that way you'll really diversify quickly, because I think if you're too big with one type of ethnicity, I think it might be hard to transition. And if you're too small in the beginning, you might just not be, I don't know, what is it called? It's just not feasible at that point to do church services. You might need to just sort of build up your core team again. So I think for me, that was a lesson I learned in hindsight, that was a good thing. That's one thing. Yeah.
I think there's always things that you reminisce about and think, well, that could have been done differently. But you see, those are learning points, and God actually has a way of building your character and building who you are through those moments, even through your failures. Something that I would say is a lot of people, especially that are going to watch this video, they have some kind of idea. They want English service. They want a touch to get the community, but they don't know exactly how it's going to look like. I would say, first and foremost, figure out your demographic, figure out your vision. Who are you reaching? Is it community people? Okay, then start making room for community people on your team. Is it Slavic Americans? Okay, then let's do everything we can. Let's be the best Slavic American church in town. Is it community people? Let's be the most effective in that who we are. And through that you learn. But I would say those are things that I having laser sharp focus. It doesn't make sense always to people coming in, and it's okay, but it has to make sense to leadership. If you do that well, there's a unity, there's a camaraderie in the team, and you'll be able to get the job done. So I would say those are my personal takeaways that I see that are super important.
Man, probably a lot I would probably do different. And I mean, there's some things I think we did well as well, but it's easier for sure to be like, there's a thousand things I probably could have done differently, said things differently, led things differently. I think one thing that stands out to me, and I think about it more often than not, I think the hardest thing I've ever done was launching something. If you ask that same question now, I'd say the hardest thing I've ever done is sustaining something. So I think launching something, when you filter it through sustaining something, is so different. A lot of people's reasonings to leaving church isn't because they don't like the church anymore. They just get bored. And so they just go find another church that's new to them. So I think everyone deals with this tension of like, I just need something new. And so new and hear me out. It was hard to launch. But in comparison to doing this since we launched for 4 years plus regularly, I think I wish I spent a little bit more time of thinking about what would look like after. So who are we becoming after? What are some values that are going to be that we want to reinforce, not just saying, but doing those things. So what is that going to take to do those things? So we spent a lot of time for sure launching the campus. Now, sure, we had moments to think about, okay, follow-up process and this, and we, you know, make sure the band's good and the kids are good and the volunteers. But there was aspects of it where I was like, man, we spend a lot of time thinking about just the launch process, getting to the finish line. And what you do unintentionally is you think the finish line is to launch. And so the biggest day of your church is when you launch and you never cross or get over the launch number, if you will, because you drew up your vision to be the finish line. So of course your biggest win is going to be just that day. And I think for me, thank God the story was different, but I think if there wasn't the right voices in my life to help remind me, hey, by the way, yesterday was awesome, but the real work starts now. So I think you can prevent some of that and be more proactive by saying, all right, I know this is launch day, but what are we working towards when it comes to the identity of our church, the community? Are we going to be doing outreach? Are we going to be, what's kids space look like? What's this and this and this? And I'm not saying figure out your buildings and your 20-year, 30-year plan, although that thing's important. But to me, I think I made the mistake of just simply thinking about just only launch day. And I was like, no, if I could do it again, think a little bit more about what's going to happen after.
It sounds like a lot like when we got married. You know what I mean? You just think about the wedding day. You don't think about the next day. Just gotta get married.
I can't wait to get married.
Wow, this is so good. You know, I've had the privilege of launching several campuses and churches, and there's one thing that I've learned too in the process is to enjoy the journey. You know, sometimes we want everything to just happen and be there. And then when we look back at the journey and all the stress and all the sacrifices that we made that we shouldn't have, you know, for the sake of our family, like enjoy the journey. You know, here's the truth. I talk to pastors all the time, and sometimes I'll ask the pastors, well, how many people do you have? And a pastor with 40 people will say, well, we're about at 60. And a pastor with 70 people will say, well, we're about at 100. And a pastor of 300 is like, well, we're close to 500. Like, you know, most pastors you talk to, they think if I can just get just a little bit more, then I'm going to finally enjoy it. And it's like, you're never going to get there unless you learn to enjoy the day, Christ, and the journey and the process and the people around you and the team around you today. Man, enjoy the journey today too. The journey is beautiful and unique to every individual, and it's going to be unique to you and in your city. And if all you do is you're going to compare yourself to Eugene or Peter or Paul or some other church down the street, man, it's going to kill it. Like enjoy your journey that Christ has you on.
Yeah, it's great.
Brothers, last question, and want to let you go. There's one suggestion that you would have to an ethnic pastor to say, hey, here's some things to do to kind of go beyond your culture, your ethnicity in terms of reaching people. What's one thing that you do that helps you reach people beyond your ethnicity?
I mean, I don't know if there's anything specifically I could say, hey, this is what I do, because really it's all become one people to me at this point. Honestly, I don't have, even though I love my culture and background, but I don't really, I think there comes a moment where it just becomes all the same, to where they're all people that need Jesus. And I think that's where I am personally right now. And so something that I do to challenge myself, because I asked my church to go and invite people to church. I challenge myself to weekly have 1-2 encounters a week that I'm handing out an invite card, talking to somebody about Jesus, praying for them, a neighbor, someone at the coffee shop, something. I challenge myself to keep myself getting stretched, because it's so easy to surround yourself by church people that you're not doing that. So I try to, I guess, keep it sharpened, the evangelism side of things. And that always positions me. I don't care, Russian, Ukrainian, American, it doesn't matter. I'll do it. And so I think that's who our church community is, and that's who we want. But we have the privilege to have a service that has Russian translation. You know, one of them. So it just gives us the more benefit for that. You know, for the community. So
yeah. I mean, I would just kind of echo what Paul says. I think it's super important to Build into your church culture DNA a missional focus, a passion for the spread of the name of Christ in your neighborhood. You want to wear it every, for me, I just do door flyers. For any event, candlelight service. I mean, I want to wear this value. I want to preach it. I don't want to just do a sermon series on it. I want to do a regular sermon and put it in there. I want our announcements to be centered around this, our events. You want to have an outreach, and you want to really, really, put some money behind it, effort behind it to be an outreach church. You want to have that healthy tension between outward focus, inward focus. And I think that's just absolutely a must. And it takes time, right? Culture building takes time, but you want to be the kind of church that really does fulfill the Great Commission.
So good.
Yeah, you guys spot on the just, if you're thinking about reaching your community, it don't matter. I mean, every community is going to have a different percentage of makeup of what the demographics are. And I think when you think about it, whether it be economically speaking or ethnically speaking, age, whatever it may be, I think number one, we know the mission is very simple, reaching every person. So if that's the case, then what values do you have in place that actually outwork that mission? So I think we can sometimes say, like, they're very easy saying, we're going to want to reach every person. All right, well, how are you going to reach every person and what you value? And so if you use social media, what's your social media look like? What's your worship team look like? What's your volunteers look like when they serve? Is it just everyone who's older or younger? Are they all females or males? Are they all the same ethnic, background or not? Like, it's really just, you got to look at it that way and say to yourself, I wonder why. If it is, I'm not saying right or wrong. I'm saying because every community is different. I'm in Orlando, and the campus in Orlando is going to look different than what's going to look like maybe in a different part of our, we got another campus in Florida, in Melbourne, Florida. And so not everything's apples to apples, but the question or the value of, if your worship team doesn't look like your community, there is a question you're asking. I'm probably not reaching my community. If your volunteers don't look a certain way, and you might have that in your church, so that maybe it's a messaging thing. I think it's really being honest with yourself and saying, like, oh man, it's okay if I'm missing the mark. Let me get some help in. So maybe it's getting help in. Maybe it's someone who's doing it well. So, I have the honor and I'm graced to kind of have different communities to kind of lean on within our context of our own church, because we're in different cities. So I can ask certain questions. But it is important for me to look in Orlando and say, all right, these are the demographics of Orlando. These are the people groups of Orlando. Does our church look like this? Does our worship team look like this? Do our leaders and staff, the staff that I hired, do they look like our community? And so I'm not saying go on a mission and just hire people that look just like certain people just so you'd be able to get those people, because I think then it becomes inauthentic. So you got to balance between authenticity, but also strategy. And where does that land? I think really authenticity and the mission should live together, and they should empower the strategy and say, oh, you know what? And I really want us to be able to reach our community. And then I think it's more on the strategy side. I'm asking questions of why. So that means something we're communicating social media wise. Maybe it's communicating from stage. Maybe it's the way it looks certain ways. Maybe it's the language we use. Like a lot of times, like the thing that we as a church really work towards is our mission statement so that people far from God will be raised to life in Christ. And that far from God is really anyone. I could be far from God in certain areas of my life, but using language that's user friendly is going to reach people far from God. If you use language that's super churchy, you probably won't reach someone that doesn't know. And I'm not saying change the scripture's meaning or you got to use the message every time. I'm saying more so how you talk about it, and make it more informal in your language and clear will help you be able to say, what is the community about? And I think that's a part that I have accountability for, if I'm real. Also at the same time, because I'm Ukrainian, I do have a lens that I look through and say, man, how would I want to be communicated to if I was a Ukrainian? Just moved here a couple years. Would this make sense to me? Or ask my parents. And I think it helped a little bit. And then friends, leaning on friends and people I'm doing life with.
The truth is, most churches in America, that's a question that they're challenged with too. How do we go beyond what most of our people look like? And so that's just I think as a church planter, I think knowing that you're not the only one with that struggle can encourage you to All right, we're all in it. We're all
Yeah.
trying to reach the community at large. So, brothers, this was rich. This was exciting. Thank you for your time. I do want to just invite you guys, if you're watching, join us this October in Kirkland, Washington. If you're watching before October 3rd and 4th, you can meet these guys in person, hang out with them. There's going to be a lot more of us. As of today, there are 97 Ukrainian Slavics across the U.S. who have planted community churches or English services. 97, that's already a lot of us. And I'm praying there's going to be hundreds more in the years to come. But thank you for taking the time to be with us. Underneath this video, I'll post these pastors' names and their church websites for you guys to kind of be able to see a little bit more who they are. But thank you for joining us. The Lord be with you.
God bless.